This is When Did Shadow Owl Get So Weak? Made by Boulevard, who is a pretty well-known commentator in the community. He has cast at Worlds, other tournaments. Fantastic at what he does, and he's also very good with statistics and analyzing them. So this is his take, based on the statistics, on when did Shadow Owl get so weak.
Today I want to get to the bottom of a mystery here in Legends of Runeterra.
Is Shadow Owl weak?
What the
is it?
Happened to the Shadow Isle? And you might be thinking, Boulevard, what are you talking about? Look at the ladder right now. Nasus Vigar is the #1 deck. Timer Jace makes the top 5. There's 2 Shadow Isle decks right there. What do you possibly mean what happened to Shadow Isle? May I turn your attention to the fact that nobody gives a shit about ladder. Let's talk competitive Runeterra. So here we have the breakdown of the top 8 of the Mastering Runeterra tournament that just happened a couple of days ago. Do you notice anything? I'll give you a spoiler. Yeah. There's no Shadow Isle decks in the top 8. And you might be wondering, how could that possibly happen? Heimer Jace and Nasus are so popular. Now, I didn't go back and check the stats on Nasus specifically, but I did see that the highest seeded Heimer Jace player at the end of Swiss was at 20th place with a solid 4-3 record. Not even the highest seeded 4-3. They were like a middle of the pack 4-3 when it comes to tiebreakers. So what happened? What does this mean?
I love this intro, by the way. Boulevard understands content creation, creates a mystery, and then aims to solve it through, like, you know, the rest of this video. But it's really interesting to look at the ladder statistic right now, right? Like, we have Nasus Vigar as the most played deck in the game with a 53% win rate. We have Heimerdinger Jace, apparently the 4th most played deck, which kind of surprised me because this was the most played deck like a week ago. 52% win rate. So you and I, you know, us, the people that are here, we're all ladder players. We don't really play tournaments. Maybe you do. Maybe you participate in a Mastering Runeterra tournament. Maybe you participate in a Runeterra Open. Maybe you do really well in it. And then you'll probably also have a better understanding of what this means, right? But ladder is entirely different from tournament meta. You're not just queuing up against like random players. You're queuing up against people that built their lineup around what they could possibly see in a tournament. Now, I can't say much about Heimerdinger Jace. I don't really like understand this deck fully, but Nasus Vigar especially just dies to landmark removal. Landmark removal, this deck has no chance of doing anything at all, right? It's a non-deck. Has absolutely no play patterns. It just does some removal, tries to play a big Nasus the fairway, and that's not a good deck. Fault makes this deck good. Heimerdinger Jace, I would like to know and see the rest of this video on why it's weak and not played in tournaments. Because to me, it feels like there's a lot of things that this deck does. It's very well rounded. But yeah, we have to see the rest of the video.
What does this mean? Here is the competitive year of 2023, starting with the World Ender Seasonal. This was still when we had top 32, so Red Gwen was the highest represented Shadow Isle deck. And you might be thinking, yeah, you know, after this rotation happened and Vile Feast went, Withering Wail went, like those powerful Shadow Isle tools, we don't have them anymore. So like, you know, that's really all it was. And I'm telling you now, it fucking wasn't. So Red Gwen, highest represented Shadow Isle deck at this event. Sure, that's good. RIP Red Gwen, the last bastion of Shadow Isle. Then we get into the Glory and Novorio. This is post-rotation. Many of you may remember the first Samira seasonal for Deep's standout performance as the highest represented Shadow Isle deck.
Deep?
No? Yeah, me neither. Then we get into the May WCQ. This is the one where Nasus popped up at the last minute. It took 11 spots, but again, just outside of the top 5 of the top 64, and this is the highest represented Shadow Isle deck for an entire year. This is as good as it gets, was the Nasus seasonal, where Nasus was a little bit of a letdown given the hype that it had going into the event. Then we take a look at Eternal, and you might...
really fast. Okay, we're going to go to Eternal. I think it's really interesting that the most played Shadow Isle decks are Gwen, which is just Hallowed. It doesn't really do any real Shadow Alley stuff. I mean, sure, it's Hallowed, right? Stuff dies, Gwen gets bigger. It's a Gwen deck. Deep is the same thing. Deep is it's a sea monster deck that tosses. It really doesn't feel Shadow Alley. Nasus, though, definitely is very Shadow Alley, in my opinion. But the other two are very, like, you know, free to find decks in what they want to do.
If you're thinking, oh yeah, you know, Vile Feast, Withering Well, that's where... Wrong. Nasus, once again, the highest represented Shadow Isle deck, way down below, outside of the top 10 even, with just 5 players making it in to the top 64. And I know you're looking at that Field of Rush, but it was 5 Ionia Field of Rush and 2 Shadow Isle. Similarly, 3 Shadow Isle, 2 PNZ on the Karma set. So Nasus is the highest actual Shadow Isle deck. But this is with Withering Wail, this is with Vile Feast. And yeah, it was a bit of a bad meta for those cards. You get thrown into the deep end and you get your pings back up against Plaza Guardians and Weapon Masters and timelines and things like that. Yeah. Really just not a meta for those ping type effects to be good. Then we take a look at the second open, and Karma's set actually comes in. 10 Shadow Isle Karma's set. Oh, wow. Once again, this is, I think, the only other time that we cracked into the top 5 post-rotation. And yeah, Karma's set is a good deck for showing off that Vile Feast and Withering Wail were the cards that were missing. But still, not the best representation, especially when you're tied for 5th place with Pirates. And I think when we actually look at the other regions, which is something that I haven't really been doing for these, you will find that then we get down to 5 Shadow Isle decks, and again, that is the highest represented for EMEA at that season. And when we look at
which is
APAC,
wild.
I think 3. Teemo Elise. Teemo Elise with 5 is the highest represented one at the second Eternal Open for APAC. Now, just to keep things homogenized, I'm going to keep only looking at the Americas. And then we have the most recent Heart of the Huntress Open, and did I forget to highlight something? No, I have to scroll down. Heimer Jace with 2. Highest represented Shadow Isle deck at that event. So, what happened here? Why is this happening? What's up with Shadow Isle? Because it is not just Vile Feast rotating. It is certainly more than that. Everybody lost something, and I think I have an idea
what
it
Atrocity is as
this is patch 3.11. This, as you can see here at the date.
That was missed, I guess.
You can't see the date. Happened over a year ago on July 19th, 2022. Now, what is patch 3.11? It's the Gwen patch, where Gwen was released. It's also the last time that Shadow Isle got a champion. That's right. It's been over a year since there's been a new Shadow Isle champion.
Oh, right.
And I do want to, for the sake of fairness, I went back and checked some of the other regions.
Yeah.
It's
fine. Karks comes next.
Came out at the end of August of last year, and that was the most recent Bandle City champion. Runeterra has been playing a lot of catch-up. Most regions have 10 or 11 champions, and there are now 10 Runeterra champions. So, it's actually been a while since most regions got a champion, and Shadow Isle's never really felt like a champ-specific region, right? Like, the Gwen decks are good. They were probably the most champion-specific decks that we got out of Shadow Isle, at least that I can recall. But, so that was over a year ago. But how has Shadow Isle been affected by the balance patches that happened this year in 2023? So we got Soul Cleave as our new card. This is patch 4.1. So patch 4.0 is what kicked off 2023 Runeterra. We got Soul Cleave, which was cool, but you never want to Soul Cleave a every Soul Cleave combo that has been conceptualized wasn't focused on a Shadow Isle card unless it was Rekindler, which was just there to get you copies of a non-Shadow Isle champion while getting more bodies on board. So the card that Shadow Isle got from the Variety patch, not really great. You might think Boulevard, no one got anything good. Castigate. Nasus was a Castigate deck. That's all I'm saying. So there were other things that happened in this balance patch. Quietus took a nerf. Obviously, that's a big one, but we're going to keep going. I promise I'll have a point here later on. Vaults of Helia got buffed in patch 4.2. That's pretty good. Atrocity also got removed from the game effectively. Well, we don't have to worry about that. But Vaults of Helia getting buffed is obviously very important because Nasus has been one of the top performing Shadow Isle decks, seasonal in and out, over the course of the year, and it's in big part to Vaults of Helia, which I'll explain in a minute here. Then we take a look at patch 4.4. This is when Opulent Foyer got nerfed, just in case there was any hope that Quinn was sticking around. This was changed so that scout attacks no longer give you back an attack, a little ghastly band if you rally with a Katarina or a scout attack or anything along those lines. So another big nerf to the region as a whole, as again, Gwen was one of the dominant Shadow Isle champions for a while. Then we have patch 4.5, which I think was the Eternal patch. This is where Withering Wail got buffed and a couple of other things
Timelines was buffed.
We got Escaped Abomination back, but there was one of these patches that I wanted to talk about because so Soul Harvest got buffed rather. Soul Harvest got buffed in the same patch that Opulent Foyer got nerfed, and that's sort of we got another buff here like Deathless Night. Overall, I didn't really find any big noticeable pattern in terms of the buffs and nerfs that have been happening to Shadow Isle over the course of the year. What I think it has more to do with is actually a bit of an identity shift. So when we look at Shadow Isle, what do you think of when you think Shadow Isle?
Mass murder.
Think about that for a second, because most people tend to think of kill spells, safe deck, safe control. And when we look at things that say kill in Shadow Isle, At the moment, we're just looking at standard because, again, I think a lot of people have it in their mind that, like,
I mean, for me,
Feast
printing,
rotating
but
the archetype.
Reunite
So we have
Entity is murder.
Quietus, we have Hate Spike, we have Glimpse Beyond, we have Soul Harvest, Soul Cleave, Crumble, Vaults, Vengeance, sort of the big ones, right? Ruination, Utter Devastation. Of course, like, Quietus has been nerfed. Soul Harvest has been buffed. Hate Spike has been played around with on a couple of different levels. Crumble got buffed, all that good stuff. But this doesn't show the whole picture. We also have to look at Drain, because a couple of these do say Drain, like Grasp of the Undying, Piercing Darkness, Undergrowth. These all say Drain.
Not that many,
Right?
actually.
Piercing Darkness is okay, but it's really only ever seen play in one deck, and that's Heimer Jace. And granted, Heimer Jace is one of the better Shadow Isle decks out there for the course of pretty much the entire year. So can't be too mad at that one, but I do think that if nothing else, the Siren Song Seasonal did show us just how good Sunburst is,
SI win the game
and how
even?
underwhelming Piercing Darkness can be, especially in comparison for the same, well, not quite the same cost point, as we did get a buff onto Sunburst, but Sunburst also deals 6 damage. I don't think Drain is as good as the premium we are paying for it these days. And Grasp of the Undying probably should be 4 mana as well. You know, we're looking at Withering Wail, didn't really make an impact. That was a bit of a meta thing, but I do think Grasp could probably use a little bit of love. Undergrowth is... Look, this card's like fine. If you want it to be good, yeah, you are going to have to either up the damage or lower the cost, but I think that probably shouldn't. I think that'd be a little bit too much. I do think you should pay a bit of a premium for Drain. But what I want to focus on here is that when we look at the kill spells of Shadow Isle, you'll notice that we're not getting as many Vengeances. We're getting a lot more stat-based removal spells, which has never really been wasn't Shadow Isle's thing in the beginning, right? Quietus has been changed to only kill things with a certain power and toughness threshold. Soul Harvest came out, that only kills things with 3 or less power. And now you're in this weird position where combat tricks are still getting printed at 1 mana, and because all of your damage or your stat-based removal in Soul Harvest and Quietus is slow speed, you're not only getting your removal countered by these combat tricks, but you're often getting punished for it, where if your opponent develops a unit and then you try to quiet it and play a combat trick, not only did you lose your priority sequence, but you are also taking more damage than you would have if you had just kept your fat mouth shut and not tried to quiet us anything. But I don't think this is the problem with Shadow Isle. I think that Shadow Isle doesn't really have a core identity, and we've seen regions not have, do a little bit of everything and succeed in the past, but that's because they excelled in so many areas, and Shadow Isle isn't really excelling in any of the areas that it has its fingers in, and the one thing it does constantly have going for it is the self-sacrifice archetype. The problem with that is that it is not as generic as you want it to be, because unlike other card games like Magic the Gathering, in Legends of Runeterra, sacrificing is not a cost. So, Nasty End, this is comparable to Glimpse Beyond. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature. That's a very important line of text. That means killing the creature is impossible, and you cannot counter my Nasty End by killing my creature. I will always draw my 2 cards unless you counter this spell. And then something
interesting. Okay, so for the people that don't understand, I don't play Magic, so I'll clarify, I guess. You cannot even play this spell unless there is a creature to sacrifice. But at that point, you've already played the card. So even if your opponent tries to counter that, the spell is already happening. So you still get the effect. Like, so let's say that for Glimpse Beyond, if it was the same as this, I'm assuming, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what it means. If you are playing a Glimpse Beyond, that means you need to have a unit on the board, which means you put it on the stack, try to kill the unit, and then even if your opponent kills the unit before you do, you still get the effect. You still get to draw 2. It's like burst speed glimpse. Yeah, I guess so. But you still have to take an action for it, right? I mean, okay, so it can still be fast speed. In a way, it just means that if the unit dies, you still get the effect, which I don't think is good for Runeterra. But there is so much way to interact right now that maybe that is the direction we should. I don't think it's possible. I don't think I want Runeterra to go in that direction. I like the back and forth. I like being able to interrupt what my opponent is trying to do. And one thing that I think was done well are actually cards like Curse Keeper. And Curse Keeper is honestly, too strong. But if you are trying to Hate Spike, Glimpse, Soul Cleave, your 1/1 can't block, you want it to die. Like, you get another upside because it dies. You get a 4/3. So even if your opponent stops your Hate Spike or your Glimpse Beyond that you're using on your Curse Keeper, you might not get the draw 2 or the deal 3. You still get that 4/3, which is really interesting.
Glimpse Beyond does not have going for it. Fling, this is Atrocity. As an additional cost to cast Fling, sacrifice a creature. Now granted, Atrocity would have been a lot more broken in Legends of Runeterra if it were sacrifices cost, but I think that it's pretty undeniable that having all of these sacrifice cards,
you need to kill your unit.
And it's hard to look them up because they say kill an ally. I guess kill an ally is something that we could look at. And it's, we're looking at some of the best Shadow Isle cards. Glimpse Beyond, Hate Spike, Crumble. It sees a little bit of play. Not the best landmark removal out there. You really don't want to be paying 4 mana and killing one of your units to kill a landmark. I really do think that Crumble shouldn't have to sack a unit to kill a landmark. I think it should be kill an ally to kill a unit or destroy a landmark, which I know is the wording on this card, but I don't think you should have to kill an ally to kill a landmark. Especially when like Scorched Earth gets to be like 3 mana fast speed kill a landmark. I think Crumble should just be 4 mana slow speed kill a landmark, and that would help.
That's fair. I like that.
Because something like Quietus, we already saw.
So what that means is so here this says kill an ally to kill a unit or destroy a landmark. It should say kill an ally to kill a unit or destroy a landmark. You don't have to kill an ally to also destroy the landmark. It should just be 4 mana slow kill a landmark, without the need to sacrifice a unit.
If you're not in a meta where you're expecting there to be equipment removal or prevalent equipment so that you need the equipment removal and the dichotomy of it, the sort of dual mode that it has there, you really shouldn't be running Quietus. If Aatrox and Weapon Masters were removed from the game today, nobody would be running Quietus in their decks. I think that's a fair statement. But when we look at the things that say kill an ally, do something, Glimpse Beyond, Hate Spike, these are some of the best cards in Shadow Isle, and they're also just not being played in most Shadow Isle decks, which is weird to say because what are most Shadow Isle decks? Again, it is really just more stuff that wants to die. Heimer Jace that have been standing the test of time and performing over the course of the entire year. When we go back to this, we look at Birthing Pod, one of the best cards in Magic the Gathering at some point in the game's history, not currently, but again, sacrifice a creature, and this is just Vaults of Helia. But an important thing to note there is that means like Vaults of Helia does function as Birthing Pod more or less unchanged, in that Vaults of Helia still requires you to sacrifice as a cost. It is the only card in Legends of Runeterra, or at least in Shadow Isle, that actually sacrifices as cost. And I think it's no coincidence that once we got a sacrificed as cost card, that became one of the most prevalent Shadow Isle archetypes over the course of the year. Like, the reason that Nasus continues to be good is because it is the one that synergizes with the self-sacrifice archetype the best, right? Obviously, you are killing your own units, that is buffing up your Nasus. Vaults of Helia being sacrificed as cost is a huge deal. We see no Glimpse Beyond even in the Nasus decks because it is just a little bit too easy to counter. Hate Spike, of course, though, a very good card for the deck, and like Soul Harvest, whatever. But the big thing about Soul Harvest as well is there's not a lot of targets in the current meta for Soul Harvest. And in matchups where there's a good target, Heimer Jace is one that comes to mind, funny enough. That is a Shadow Isle deck. But when you're looking at a champion like Heimerdinger and you're going, oh yeah, like I need to have my 3 mana kill a Heimer, otherwise it's going to be mana negative for me to try to kill this Heimerdinger, because it's going to have to be at least 6 mana for a Vengeance or a Piercing Darkness or what have you. There are other things that you could Soul Harvest in the matchup. There are 3 damage turrets that are beating your ass. There are 3 3s coming off of whatever that are beating your ass. Yep. And you can't really afford to Soul Harvest them because you kind of have to save it for the Heimerdinger, or else you're taking a big net loss on your mana. So I think Nasus is continuing to perform very well because 1, sacrifices cost on Vaults of Helia, 2, synergizes with the actual identity of the archetype that we have, which is self-sacrifice, so well. And then when we look at Heimer Jace really just needs a little bit more removal than Piltover and Zon offers. Quietus, Soul Harvest, Piercing Darkness, Vengeance, Ruination. Go to Tippy's build. I'm sure we've got something similar. Right? Yeah, Piercing Darkness, Vengeance, Soul Harvest, Quietus.
Poor Tippy, man.
This isn't a Shadow...
Okay, hold on. I don't know who this is here, but this says 54% win rate, and then Tippy has a 47% win rate. What's the change?
I'm sure we've got something similar. Yeah, Piercing Darkness, Vengeance, Soul Harvest, Quietus.
Spinner.
Like, this isn't a Shadow Isle deck. This is a deck that is playing some of the premium Shadow Isle removal spells. And it's really just Vengeance. And then it's like 1 Piercing Darkness because we might as well just play another single target 6 mana spell. Like, Heimer Jace doesn't have to be Shadow Isle. And I think we've seen a little bit more of a rise in like Ionia Heimer Jace kind of trying to challenge the notion that this has to be a Shadow Isle deck. And this is, again, one of the top performing Shadow Isle decks over the course of the year, putting 2 people into the top 64 at the most recent America's Heart of the Huntress Runeterra Open. Yeah. So when we're not doing self-sacrifice stuff and we're not barely a Shadow Isle deck, Shadow Isle just isn't really doing anything. And I think that it mostly comes down to a lack of synergy within the archetype. There's just too many different things going on here. And with self-sacrifice trying to be the most powerful thing that you're doing, with how much counterplay there is available to self-sacrifice, it's just not a consistent enough strategy where it is in other games.
I think that's really well said. What I do like is that rotation for Shadow Isle has kind of made the region about murder, about mass murder, about killing your own stuff with just clicking one button and killing your opponent's stuff by just clicking one button, right? It is like the point and click remove something region. There's no shenanigans, there's no hoops you need to jump through to get something done. It is just that, just kill, just efficient kill. But the problem is very often you need to kill your ally to kill the opponent's stuff, which is fine. However, there isn't actually very many tokens or units that want to die. This is why Curse Keeper, obviously Curse Keeper was played in more like of a mid-range aggressive slay deck, where it was like, yeah, I'm fine killing this. And on the other hand, we had spiders that were generated through Val Feast, a token. You don't mind giving up your 1/1 to hate spike it to kill something else, because yeah, you're not going to use that. But very often right now, we see these type of decks, like the Nasus deck, they have to give up their Rockbear Shepherd to hate spike something, or their, you know, the 2/1, the cultist that they're playing. There needs to be more stuff on the board that is okay with dying for these strategies to be good. And Curse Keeper, I have always said, is very good at that, but it's also really boring to always be the same thing. It's always, oh, my Slay deck is running Curse Keeper because it is just the best thing and the only thing that actively wants to die. I don't know what else there really is in the past that is just says like, yeah, kill, yeah, Undying, I guess. But Undying, it's there's not that much payoff. It's Undying is nothing more than an engine for you to keep killing your own stuff, but it very rarely turns into win con. It's just an enabler, and it's just not good enough at that in 2023. It is a 2/2 that can't block, and 2 turns later you have a 4/4. That's still bad. That's still garbage. That's just not good. It's too slow. There's also not enough spells to consistently use it on. And even if you have a hand with a lot of kill spells, you want more than just the Undying. It comes back next turn, so you can't use it like twice in one turn. Unless you have 2 Undying, and then you have a board space issue, and they can't quite end the game for you, and they can't block, so you're just like stuck with this stuff that you pay 3 mana for, and it can't even efficiently block your opponent. It's just... it's not good. Prey generators, yeah, so I'm actually a bit surprised, because... you have the Wings and the Wave, which is either something that kills or is something that puts 2 things that want to be killed on the board for 1 mana, which is very good. But that 3/3 part is almost never used because a 3/3 is just kind of meaningless if you also have to kill your own thing for it. You can't do it on turn 1, and a 3/3 obviously becomes worse as the game goes on. So there need to be more stuff like Curse Keeper for me to even consider playing it as a 3/3, because I'd much rather play my Hate Spike to stay in the game by killing my opponents over my Crumble or my Glimpse to draw cards. Drawing 2 cards after turn 3 is quite often better than a 3/3, depending on the deck you're playing. But right now with Curse Keeper rotated, that is absolutely better. Pesky Spectre is also rotated, which is a big thing about this video, right? After rotation, there is just a bit of a region identity crisis for Shadow Isles. They are very good. Like, there is a very cohesive theme within Shadow Isles. It's just that the cards don't quite match up or provide the tools that you need to make a good deck out of it.
And so that's, I think, the core of Shadow Isle's issue right now. When you look at all these different cards that, like, you just go through the region, Spirit Leech, again, another card that is sacrifice as cost, but just being a 4/1 means that people aren't really playing it right now, but, you know, Spirit Leech may end up coming back someday. I think it's no coincidence that, like, just in general, some of the best self-sacrifice cards do sacrifice cost.
Okay, sorry, I'm pausing again. Somebody just brought up a really good point. Rise Arc, Shadow Isle was made to be dependent on Shurima. That is a very good point right now, because if you are playing a Slay deck, a deck that kills a lot of stuff, why don't you play Nasus as your win con, right? That's what it comes down to. Like, Shurima has good enough tools that are like, that can stand on their own, like Rockbear Shepherd, like the Forsaken Bakai, like Nasus, like Castigate even. You want these cards in your deck if you are trying to kill a lot of stuff. So what I'm worried about is that if we eventually get Yorick and Karthus in the game with the data mined keyword called deathless. Sounds a lot like, you know, death, like stuff wants to die. What I'm worried about is that they provide us with like a package that's like, hey, here's some stuff for Shadow Isles, here's some stuff for, I don't know, Bilgewater, Demacia, Ionia, I don't know, anything really. Here's some stuff for that region, and this is supposed to go together. And then everybody's going to be like, yeah, but nah, because I'm going to play the Shadow Isle stuff like Karthus, and I'm going to pair that with Shurima and Nasus. That is what I'm worried about, that an entire side of a package is going to get completely ignored because Nasus didn't get rotated. And self-sacrificing will always just be the Shurima Shadow Isle deck. So I hope they can give us something interesting that doesn't just automatically provide this region combo as the core of a deck. Even Doombeast, Blighted Caretaker, aggro in the past heavily relied on Shurima cards to even be crazy. Yeah, I agree. Like, what was the... Because that is aggressive, right? Doombeast and Blighted Caretaker are aggressive cards. So they also had an aggressive 1-drop. I forgot the name. The 1/2 with Fearsome that got +1 attack every time you slay something. That card. That's just part of that too. So it's really... It's just weird to see that it's always Shurima Shadow Isle. And that makes these other decks that want to do Shadow Isle things just worse, unless it's specifically Jace Heimer that happened to synergize with Vengeance as a 6-cost card, and you just need a little bit more removal in their deck anyway through Soul Harvest and Quietus, and you know, the one of Ruination and Drain Spell. It's like really, really, really specific. I do enjoy that Nasus Vault is this type of deck that really goes all in on this Shadow Isle playstyle. It feels fitting, it feels rewarding, it feels like it makes sense. But that is also very worrisome for the future. What is Shadow Isle going to do in a few months from now when we get a new champion for Shadow Isles? Is it just going to be new champion plus Shurima and Nasus? I hope Runeterra finds a way to fix that, because yeah, the region can do a lot of cool stuff, but we don't really see that right now because all this self-sacrifice and slave stuff doesn't really work without better tokens to kill. So one way to fix that, actually, now that I think about it, one way to fix that is to give those tokens to another region. What if Bilgewater or Ionia get those tokens that say, like, if another ally died this round, do X. If I die, do X. If a card of this name died, do X. That could actually be a way to fix that. Those cards need to go outside of Shurima to make it so that it isn't just automatically a Nasus deck. That is one angle that I could see for that. Really fast, there is about 1 minute left on this video. Please go subscribe to Boulevard. Absolutely fantastic content. I would love to just spread more love to the entire community of Runeterra and the different types of content that they're making, which is this, you know, just an analysis on why Shadow Isle is the way it is. I could not do this by myself. Boulevard is absolutely the only person in the community that could make this type of analysis while also bringing it in such a charismatic way. The dude is a fantastic commentator, shoutcaster for that reason. Always love hearing his voice, opinion, and takes and hype moments when there is a tournament. So please, like the video, hit up with a sub,
the
banger content.
Here. But what do we got here when we're scrolling down? We got hollowed units, but again, like Gwen has kind of been nerfed into the ground at this point. We've got kill spells. Like if you want to get really big in Shadow Isle, you can do that, but you have to kill it yourself, and that's the core of Encroaching Mists in the Viego archetype. Like everything is available to you in Shadow Isle. Mostly, you just have to pay a bit too much of a premium for it, especially when it comes to like self-sacrifice and opening yourself up to the various amounts of counterplay that can happen there. So that is my analysis of what happened to Shadow Isle. It has moved too heavily into the self-sacrifice archetype without having sacrifice as a cost in Legends of Runeterra outside of Vaults of Helia, thus the high presence of Nasus. It is not excelling in any other area. Like if you want to stat check your opponent, you have to again lean into self-sacrifice either through like Darken Halberd or stacking up your Viego or something like that. If you want to kill landmarks, you have to self-sacrifice and open yourself up to counterplay through Crumble. And I think that it probably only takes a couple of buffs on some Shadow Isle staples to get the region back on track. Another champion probably couldn't hurt, given that Gwen was the last one, and she herself doesn't synergize with what already existed in Shadow Isle, really just supported by the archetype that she came out with. And so yeah, I'm a big Shadow Isle enjoyer. I would like to see some buffs to the archetype, but I think what I want specifically is going to have to wait for another video. Do let me know in the comments what you think, though. Was it just the Vile Feast? Am I making all of this up? Am I being paranoid on some Runeterra conspiracy theory type shit? I have been Boulevard. You've been great, and I will see you next time.
Okay, so really fast. You guys make a really good point, Cinnamon. The cards that I just mentioned are basically in Demacia, right? The do X when an ally has died is Dawn Speakers. That is the card that would synergize with Shadow Owl. So yeah, it is possible. But what else was there? There was Radiant Guardian, which has been rotated. We had the Vanguard Redeemer, the 3-mana 3/3 that draws a card if something has died this turn. Dawn Speakers. Those are exactly the type of cards that would do fantastic. Vayne Dog. Vayne Dog is another one. Exactly. Those are exactly the type of cards that would do very well with this type of strategy and move it away from Shurima. If Karthus comes to the game, and I'm saying Karthus here, and I'll explain why in a bit. If Karthus comes to the game, Karthus in League of Legends is all about death, staying a little longer after you've died, and, you know, mass murder, like Requiem, killing the entire enemy team. That is Karthus. Karthus is about extending your own life by a little bit when you shouldn't and killing everything else. So the reason that I think it's Karthus over Yorick, and I love Yorick more, like I'm a bit of a top lane player. I like both champions a lot. I both have them on level 7, but Yorick, I think his whole theme, his voice is just so well done. Actually, like top 3 voiceovers in the entire game. Yorick is up there, together with Jhin and Aurelion Sol. The reason I think it's Karthus over Yorick is because Yorick is very much about ghouls and tokens. And it feels like that is a thing that, while it could benefit Shadow Owl very well, we're missing the tokens and that type of playstyle that we've kind of not seen after spiders have been rotated. I think it's still going to be Karthus because of the way they shifted their focus in Shadow Owl on more of the mass murder stuff. So it seems like that is the type of thing that they want to promote more with the printing of Soul Harvest, Eradication, even like the back and forth on Hate Spike to make sure it's in a good place. Soul Cleave, even. That type of stuff feels very, very Karthusy. And Yorick, while the tokens are definitely a thing, it feels like it's not as present because they're not printing any more token enablers or token payoff. Which makes me think that, yeah, even with the Deathless keyword that has been data mined, seems like Karthus is going to be the angle for the upcoming Shadow Owl champion. And yeah, when that happens, I'm sure we'll see like the entire region move into a bit of a more hopefully satisfying and present in tournaments type of direction. Again, though, please check out Boulevard. One more link, like, comment, hit him with a sub, and let me know if you guys enjoyed this, because this is much more analytical. I personally really, really like watching this stuff because I am not a tournament player. I'm not a high ladder player most of the time, or like ever, really. So I would love to do more of this type of stuff. Let me know what you guys think.